Masechet Yevamot, Daf Bet. Let's start with a few words of introduction. We're starting a new Seder Nashim, and the first Masechet is Yevamot. There's a lot of discussion about why this should be the first Masechet. How about start with Kiddushin? Don't you have to get married first before you can think about Iboom? And there's lots of answers, but the very simple answer is that the order of Masechtot go in size order from the biggest to the smallest, counting the number of prakim in the Mishnah. And so Yevamot is the largest with 16 prakim. Ketuvot is only 13, and that's the reason for the order. Okay, Masechet Yevamot is going to be a lot about the laws of Iboom, but it will also include lots of other topics about conversion and aguna and arayot, status of various categories of people and their marital status. So it'll introduce a whole lot of concepts in a way we have to learn a whole language about how the laws of marriage work, and we'll find that all in Yevamot. Okay, what is Iboom? Well, we do have two stories in Tanakh about Iboom. One is Yehuda and Tamar, where Yehuda is the father-in-law, and this would be prohibited under halacha for a father-in-law to perform Iboom. That would be erva, and the child would be mamzer. But Yehuda does do it with his daughter-in-law, and that's considered fine and praiseworthy, and the progenitor of David HaMelech. So it seems that was before, pre-halacha. This was common. In other words, the idea is that if a man dies without children, it's not just the brother, but the relatives and closest relative, including here the father-in-law. The other story we have is in Megillat Ruth, where Boaz performs Iboom with Ruth. It doesn't call Iboom, but it looks like the same thing. When Elimelech dies, and he's the closest relative, except for Piloni Almoni, who's even closer. And Boaz is not a brother to Elimelech, but some kind of cousin. And so you see here also, the obligation fell upon the closest relative, not just the brother. Okay, but when we come to the Torah, it says Ki yeshevu achim yachdav. Achim could theoretically mean a relative or another man, but we can take it more exactly, literally as actual brothers, and that is how the rabbis understand it, that this law only applies to brothers. This is very significant because if someone is intimate with his brother's wife, let's say while he's alive, or after he's dead, and they have children, that is one of the adayot. That is strictly prohibited. So this is a relationship, someone and his sister-in-law, that is generally absolutely prohibited. But Iboom is an exception to this law, that if he dies without children, or ben-in-law, ben or bat, he doesn't have any children, then we may not allow the woman to go marry a foreigner, but rather Yevamah, her brother-in-law, must be with her and take her as a wife, and that is what's called Iboom. The purpose is to uphold the name of the dead, and the firstborn will uphold, in fact, the name. Now, this also doesn't necessarily mean literally Yakum Hashem Achiv Hamet, that if the dead brother was named Yosef, that you have to name the child Yosef. You could, but the main point is legally that child is a child of the deceased brother and will inherit the brother's estate. And so the live brother who's doing the Iboom, we call him a Yavam, is kind of a surrogate father, but legally remains the descendant, the heir of the deceased brother, so that his name will not be wiped out in Israel. So that's the purpose of this quite exceptional law that normally would be erva, but here is actually a mitzvah. All right, we'll get back into the Pesukim as we go through the Masechet, but one point that we're going to need to know today, which is that the rabbis permit polygamy, and they also permit nis marriage. These are two items that for example, the Dead Sea sect prohibited. They said you have to be married to only one wife, and while the Torah says a man may not marry his aunt, so everybody agrees that a man may not marry an aunt, the Torah does not say anything about the man marrying his niece. The Dead Sea sect says it works both ways. If it's the same relationship, it's prohibited in both. But the rabbis actually say it's permitted because the Torah does not actually say anything about that. And sometimes they even encouraged it as a favor to your brother to take care of his daughter. So niece marriage, I believe, is still legal in a few states under certain circumstances, but generally is taboo today. But it was practiced and even encouraged back in rabbinic times. All right, I think that's enough introduction. And now we can get right to the Mishnah that says, Chamesh Asre Nashim Potrot Sarotehem Vesarot Sarotehen Min HaChalitza Umin HaYibum Ad Sof HaOlam. The first Mishnah introduces with exceptions to the rule of when you don't do Yibum, which I guess is typical of the Mishnah to start with. When you don't do it, it's already assuming you know the standard case of when you do perform Yibum. Okay, so before we get to this example, let's look at this chart here and see how it works. The way the charts work is if two people have patterned clothing and the same pattern, then they are brothers. This means they're married. Okay, so forget this line here for a second. Make believe Reuven is not related to Chana. We're going to have them related in a minute. But let's say you have the Shimon here, and Shimon is married to two wives, which is permitted in halacha, and he dies without children from any of them. Well, in that case, Reuven would perform Yibum. How? Who would he do that with? Well, he can choose either wife, right? But only one to perform Yibum. So he would do Yibum, let's say, with Penina, and they would have a child, and then very good. And then Chana would be off the hook, and she could marry anybody else. All right, so that's also a simple case, even though it involves two wives. And here is where it gets complicated. The first item on this list is going to be Ve'eluhen bitot. This is what I'm describing now. So here's a case where you would not do Yibum. If Reuven has a daughter, Hannah, and his brother Shimon marries the niece, right? Shimon marries Hannah. So Shimon is marrying his niece. And as we said, that's perfectly legitimate in halacha to marry a niece. Now, Shimon also is married to a woman who's not related. That's Penina. Okay, so all good until Shimon dies. So now Reuven has to perform Yibum, right? Well, one of the wives is his daughter. What is he going to do Yibum with his daughter? That's insane and not allowed. So not only does he not have to do Yibum, he may not do Yibum. How about Chalitza? He doesn't even have to do Chalitza. In other words, the mitzvah of Yibum never applies in this case because he is related. This would be arayot to one of the wives. He may not perform Yibum, certainly not with Chana. How about Penina? He cannot do it with Penina either. And so that's what we say here, 15 women, 15 different types of relationships, exempt sarotehen. The word sarah means a rival wife or a co-wife. They're called rivals because anytime there are two wives, they're definitely going to be at each other's necks, hating each other. We don't have any example in history of co-wives that like each other. So that's their definition, their name are sarot. So that means that in this case, Reuven obviously cannot do Yibum with his daughter, and therefore, since she has a co-wife, he also, the same rules apply to the co-wife. He may not do Yibum with her or co-wife, or if there's other wives, none of them, they're all out of the picture. No Yibum, no Chalitza. They're automatically free to marry anyone they want. Okay, so that's the case of Nashim Potrot Sarotehem. Now let's explain, what does it mean, sarot sarotehem? The co-wife's co-wife. That would mean from a next marriage. So here is the example. It's getting a little bit more complicated. We have the same case as before. Reuven has a daughter, Chana, and Chana married Reuven's brother, Shimon. So far, so good. Now they have another brother, in this case, Levi. So although Reuven is related to his daughter and he's out of the picture, he cannot do Yibum. In this case, the women are not free to marry anyone they want because there is another brother. And Levi is not related to Penina. He's related to Chana. He's an uncle, but uncle marriage is permitted. And so in this case, although Reuven is out of the picture, Levi must perform Yibum. And let's say he does. So he takes Penina. Okay, if he takes Chana, he could do that. But let's say he takes Penina and he does Yibum. He happens to have another wife also, Miriam. Okay, now Levi dies. The X means he died first. Two X's means Levi died second. Okay, now he died, and now Reuven is still around. So can Reuven perform Yibum with Penina? Well, the answer is no, because one time Penina fell to him for Yibum, and he was not allowed to perform Yibum with her because of his daughter. Therefore, Penina is permanently prohibited to Reuven. That's Sarot. Not only that, even Miriam. So that's Sarot, Sarotahem. It's his daughter's co-wife, right? That's the co-wife of the co-wife, that's Miriam. So Reuven cannot do Yibum, not with Penina, not with Miriam, and so on. Ad sof ha'olam, this would be true. In other words, even if it happened again, let's say there are 100 brothers, and then let's say there's another brother, Yehuda, who then he does Yibum with Miriam, and then he has another co-wife. You can go on and on. Reuven will be prohibited from his daughter's co-wife and their co-wives forever, no matter how many links in the chain. Okay, good. So they do not do chalitza or yibum forever. If Reuven would take Penina or Miriam, that would be prohibited. The child would be a mamzer. Okay, good. So I hope you have this concept down straight. And with that, we can continue with the other 14. So categories of relationships. These are simply categories of arayot, in which someone who is married, if his brother is married to one of these arayot, he may not perform yibum. So we saw the case of bito. Next case is ubat bito, ubat beno. So that would be his granddaughter from his son, or the granddaughter from his daughter's daughter, or his son's daughter. Let's see those cases here. Bat bito, Reuben here has a daughter Chana, who has a daughter Ada, and then Shimon, who's Reuben's brother, marries this Ada. Okay, what about the age difference? How does it work? Is Ada 12? I don't know. Don't worry about it. These are all theoretical. And then Shimon dies. So now, let's say they're the only brothers, and now Reuven has to perform Yibum with his granddaughter? No way, that's erva. So he can't do that. Because he's prohibited to his granddaughter, he also cannot do Yibum with a sila, and therefore they're off the hook, and he does not perform Yibum or chalitza with either of them. Okay, so the same thing would be for bat beno, is the same exact case as we just saw, but instead of a daughter's daughter, it's a son's daughter, but you get the same idea. And then the next one on the list here, let's go back, is bat ishto, ubat bena, ubat bita. So the daughter of his wife, meaning she had a daughter from a different marriage, or his wife's granddaughter from her son or from her daughter. And after that, we're going to see chamoto, mother-in-law, em chamoto ve'em chamiv, and the mother of his mother-in-law or the mother of his father-in-law. Okay, so let's see each of these in step and see how helpful these charts are. So bat ishto, we have Miriam here. She once was married to Zerach and had a daughter Hannah, but then she remarried Reuven after she divorced or he died, doesn't matter. And okay, she married to him. Now Reuven has a brother Shimon. Shimon married this daughter. So you have two brothers, one's married to the mother and one's married to the daughter. That's all okay, just perfectly fine. But then Shimon dies. Now here's a law. Reuven may not marry his wife's daughter, even though he's not biologically related. Nevertheless, this his wife's daughter is prohibited, and that therefore, since he's prohibited to this, he's prohibited to the whole, to the sarot as well. Now, bat bena would be a similar case to this one, except we move down a generation. Miriam and Zerach had a son, Hur, who had a daughter, Hannah, and same thing. Reuven is prohibited to his wife's granddaughter, who was married to Shimon. He died. He cannot marry. He cannot be married to a woman and her granddaughter ever. And this is the same thing. Bat bita is the same exact thing as what we just said, but instead of this being a boy, it's a girl. So it's Miriam's daughter's daughter, which is still a granddaughter, and Reuven is prohibited to her, and therefore off the hook. Okay, now we have chamoto. We're switching around the generations. In this case, Reuven is married to Miriam. Shimon is married to Miriam's mother. Okay, that's totally fine. Two brothers married to a mother and a child and a daughter. The thing is, when Shimon dies, Reuven cannot be with his mother-in-law ever. So therefore, the Yibum and Chalitza do not apply to her, do not apply to Penina. That was the next case. Now, Em Chamota is similar to what we just saw, except we're adding in another generation. Shimon and Reuven are brothers. One is married to the granddaughter, one is married to the grandmother. That's all permitted, except that when Shimon dies, then that would mean theoretically Reuven would have to marry you do Yibum with his wife's grandmother. Well, you're not allowed to be married to a person and her grandmother. And so this is prohibited, and therefore no Yibum, no Chalitza, not for anybody. And the same thing is just replacing this woman with a man, still his wife's grandmother, and that's the case of Em Chamoto. So far, so good. Next few cases are Achoto Me'imo, his maternal half-sister, Achot Imo, his mother's sister, his aunt, Achot Ishto, his sister-in-law. You can't be married to two sisters at the same time, although if one sister dies, one may marry the other one. So here we're assuming that the sisters are alive. Av Eshet Achiv Me'imo, the wife of his half-brother, maternal half-brother. Okay, these cases are just a little bit more complicated to construct, but the idea is the same. And so here we have Achoto Me'imo, his maternal half-sister. So here we have Reuven, who has a maternal half-sister. See, his mother, follow the line, is Miriam. And Miriam was once married to Zerach and had a daughter. And then she married Yaakov, and they had a son. So therefore, Reuven and Chana are half siblings from their mother. Yaakov also married another woman, Leah, and they had Shimon. Shimon just happened to marry this half-sister, Chana, and he died. Well, Reuven is not allowed to be intimate with his half-sister, and therefore, no Yibum, no Chalitza for anybody here. Next case is Achot Imo, means an aunt. So Reuven, Shimon is married to Milcah. Milcah has a sister, Hogla, and Hogla and Yaakov had a child, Reuven. So Reuven's mother is Hogla. His aunt happens to be Milcah, who married her brother. So two brothers married to a niece. Sorry, this is his mother, and his mother has a sister from mother has a sister. So the brother from a different wife married the sister. Right, the Shimon and Milcah are not related because they have different parents. Okay. Anyway, the mother dies. Shimon dies, and then theoretically Reuven would have to marry his mother's sister. Aunt is not allowed, and that is off the hook. Okay, now Achot Ishto is a simpler case. Two brothers marry two sisters. This happens sometimes, right? It's a lot of fun. They all get together for holidays, two brothers, two sisters. However, if Shimon should die, then Reuven would theoretically need to marry his wife's sister, and that's not allowed as long as his wife is alive. And so if she's alive at the time when Shimon dies, then his sister is prohibited to him, and no Yibum, no Chalitza. Okay, now Eshet Achiv Me'imo, the wife of his maternal half-brother. Here's Reuven, and so we're looking for his maternal half-brother's wife. So let's see. Yaakov married Miriam, that's here, who had a son, Levi, from her previous marriage to Zerach. So that's Levi here. Yaakov and Miriam had a son named Reuven, and so Reuven and Levi are half brothers. They have the same mother. Now Levi married Chana, and he died. After his passing, Shimon married Chana, who's permitted to him because they are not related to each other. So Levi is the son of his father's wife, right? They have the same brother, they have the same father, but different mothers. And so that's a regular case of Yibum. However, now Shimon dies childlessly. Hannah, who's forbidden to Reuven because he was his maternal wife's brother's wife, as Levi was the son of Miriam, Reuven's mother. So Penina, Hannah's rival, also cannot. So the point is Reuven and Levi, because they were related before, Hannah is his sister-in-law and was prohibited to him. So even after she goes to Shimon, she is still prohibited to him. And there's two more cases. Eshet achiv shelo haya be'olamo. Okay, so this be'olamo means that a brother can do yibum only if he was alive at the time that the brother who died was also alive. They have to be alive at the same time. But it can happen that Reuven dies and then Levi is only born after Reuven dies, right? The mother's still around and the mother lost a child, but she has another child afterwards. Since Reuven and Levi were not around at the same time, or did not live at the same time, he cannot do Yibum. So here's how it works. You have Penina and Reuven are married, Shimon and Hannah are married, and then Reuven dies. Okay, Penina stays single. In the meantime, Levi is born. This brother is born. Okay, so now Shimon dies too. Okay, poor family. And now Levi was alive while Shimon was alive. So theoretically, he would be permitted to take Hannah and do Yibum with her. However, because he was not alive when Reuven was alive, so Penina is a sister-in-law who was lo haya be'olamo, who was a sister-in-law not when he was alive, not when Reuven was alive. So because Levi was not alive when Reuven died, therefore he cannot do Yibum with Penina. Penina is forbidden to him. Because Penina is forbidden to him, so is Hannah. Okay, that's that case. And Kalato means that Reuven has a son who's married to a woman. And so that's his daughter-in-law. And if he should die, then his daughter-in-law goes and marries a brother, Shimon. Okay, so his daughter-in-law is marrying his brother. That's okay. But if Shimon dies after that, then that would mean that Reuven would have to take his daughter-in-law in Yibum. That's prohibited relationship. And so therefore Penina also does not do Yibum. And that's it. That's all 15 cases. Okay. All right. So now we'll go on with the Mishnah. So we just saw Eshet achiv shelo haya be'olamo ve'chalato. What do all these 15 have in common? Hare elu potrot sarotehen ve'sarot sarotehen min hachalitza umin hayibum ad sof ha'olam. They all exempt their co-wives and the co-wives' co-wives forever. All right, so that's the main part of the Mishnah. And now we add a few more details. Vechulan, im metu o me'anu, o nitgadeshu, o shnimseu ailonit, sarotehen mutarot. Here's the thing, if the relative died, let's take the simple case of the daughter, right? Reuven's daughter married Shimon, and let's say the daughter dies first, and then Shimon dies. In that case, Reuven would be able to take the co-wife. Let's go back to that first picture, right? Reuven has a daughter, Hannah, and married to Shimon. If Shimon dies, he can't do Yibum with his daughter. But let's say Hannah died first, or they were divorced. And so now, when Shimon dies, he is no longer together with Hannah. In that case, he can and has to do Yibum with Penina because his daughter is not in the picture anymore at the time that Shimon died. So it's all about the order of when things happen. Imetu or me'anu. Me'anu is another concept. If there's a girl whose father died, she's orphaned, then the brother or the mother can marry her off as a minor. However, that only has a derabanan effect, and she can protest to it. Me'anu is to protest. When that girl gets a little older, she can say, listen, I didn't want this. I don't want this guy. And then retroactively, that marriage is zero. So if she undoes the marriage before Shimon dies, then that's it. They're no longer married. And then Reuven would be able to take Shimon's other wife, and so on, or nitgo if they were divorced, or shimsoilonit, or if the wife, let's say the Sarat Habat, that daughter, is found out to be Ailonit. Ailonit means some woman who is underdeveloped and cannot have children. And so therefore that marriage is not a full marriage. And because they weren't fully married in the first place, so then it's you don't have to worry about that. He's still, let's say it's his daughter, Reuven's daughter, who's an Ailonit, because she was never fully married to Shimon. Reuven in that case can take the co-wife. So sarotehen mutarot. By the way, this is just a note on the previous. It looks like it's an insertion into the Mishnah, noting that when we say if she's found to be underdeveloped and therefore can't have children, that would obviously not apply to the case of someone's mother-in-law or mother's mother-in-law or or father-in-law's mother, because all those people had children. So since they physically had children, that obviously are not Ailoniyot, and so that wouldn't, so that wouldn't be a possibility. They also didn't protest, because if they had children, that means they were married long enough to have children, and their marriage is a full marriage. And so even if it was done by the mother and the sister, it means that she did not protest. So those categories, these two categories, would not apply to these three cases. Kesad poterot sarotehen. Now, everything we just said, Mishnah is going to say now and explain it and explain it. So we already know we already know this. So let's review it to make sure. How does this work? That they would exempt if someone's brother marries one of these 15 relationships, it exempts not only them but also the co-wife. How so? Haita bito, for example. If the one of the co-wives was his daughter, or any one of these 15, and Nesuot Lachiv, who was married to his brother, and his brother also had another wife, umet, and then the brother dies. Just like that, the daughter of Reuven, she does not have to do Iboom or Chalitza, so too her co-wife does not have to do an Iboom or Chalitza. But she does have to do Yibum or Chalitza with another brother who is not related. And if she does do Yibum, either her or the Tzara, the co-wife, if the co-wife goes ahead and marries yet another brother, like Levi, Velo Ishachet, and Levi has another wife, Umet, and he dies, just like his daughter's co-wife is exempt, so too his daughter's co-wife's co-wife is also exempt, even if this process continues 100 times. So how so? That if they die, their co-wives are, so if they die, meaning if let's say the Reuven's daughter dies before Shimon, then Reuven would be permitted to Shimon's other wife. For example, if his daughter or any of these other relationships are married to his brother, and the brother has another wife, and then his wife either dies or divorces Shimon, and then Shimon dies, Sarata muteret, then Reuven may perform Yibum with his daughter's co-wife. Good. Hakol v'kol hayechola lema'en v'lo me'ana sarata choleset v'lo mityabemet. Someone who still can protest, in other words, a minor who still has the ability to protest the marriage, but she doesn't, and then her husband dies, then they have to do either chalitza. Then sarata choleset, they should do chalitza and not yibum. The reason is because it was not a full marriage, because she always could have done mi'un, and therefore we don't want her to do yibum, because if it was not a full marriage, then you wouldn't be able to do yibum. So just to be safe, because it was not a full marriage, we want them to do chalitza, separate, and leave, right? The rival wife may not enter in levirate marriage, because she is the rival wife of a forbidden relative. However, she is not entirely exempt, and so she does have to do chalitza, because it was on some level a marriage, but not a full marriage. And that's the Mishnah. And now we begin the Gemara. Mikedi, kuluhu me'achot isha yalfinan, litni achot isha beresha. Now, since all of these women, all of these forbidden relationships, the fact that they're exempt, is derived from a case of a wife's sister. We're going to see this later on, that it's the wife's sister that is the source of all these laws. So why don't you teach that first? Because that's the source to know that rivals are prohibited, right? We're not going to see that today, but just take it on faith, and we'll see this argument soon. Now, so why not list her first? That's what the Gemara is talking about, is the order of these women, of why they're here. This is a kind of typical opening sugya in the Talmud Bavli. Often the opening sugya has no names of Amoraim. It's from the editors, and it's kind of intro, and the intros often dwell on details of the language of the Mishnah. But through that, we'll also see some important ideas about the content. So that's the question. Why not do the case of the person? This is the case of two brothers married to two sisters, and one dies, so he cannot be with his wife's sister. So that should be first, because that's the source for all the others. And nakat. So maybe you'll say it wants to do the ones that are the most stringent first. Now, in terms of stringency, I want to introduce to you last concept for today, which is that there are 4 levels of marital prohibitions. The first and least stringent is something that is prohibited by a positive commandment. So a Kohen Gadol said he has to marry a betula. If he marries a non-betula, he violates a positive commandment. It's not allowed, but that's the lowest level. The second is a lav, a negative commandment. So a Kohen may not marry a divorcee. But if he does, the marriage takes hold. Right? It is in fact a marriage. The children are not mamzerim. Or if a mamzer marries a regular Jew, also violates a negative commandment, would get lashes. However, adayot are karet. All arayot deserve karet. That includes a sister, a wife's sister, which one that we just mentioned. Okay, and then the most severe are death by a court, which covers only some arayot are in this category. So the most stringent is stoning, which would be if someone is intimate with his daughter-in-law. He would deserve stoning. If someone is intimate with his daughter, granddaughter, mother-in-law, etc., a lot of other cases, then his punishment would be burning, death by burning. Generally, most rabbis think that stoning is worse than burning, so stoning would be the worst, and then burning. Okay, so with that in mind, we say maybe it's doing the most stringent first, and this would have to follow to be Shimon, and so because he says that burning is the worst, it begins with daughter, and daughter's daughter and son's daughter and so forth, because those are done, the punishment for them is burning, so it's doing the most stringent first. Well, that might explain the reason. Well, ihachi litnei hamoto beresha deikar serefa bachamoto ketiva. If that's the reason, then you should list the mother-in-law case first, because that's actually the source for how we know that we burn these people with fire, right? As if a man be take his wife Also, her mother is wickedness, they shall burn with fire. In the other cases, it doesn't say explicitly, and we learn it from them. So then she should have been first if that was the reason. ועוד בטל חמותו לתנה כלתו דבטל שרפה סקילה חמורה. And if that was also the case, then after we list the mother-in-law, it should say daughter-in-law, because that's after serefa, sikila is the most stringent, and so it should go next with the second most stringent, and it doesn't. So that can't be the reason that it's going from the most stringent to the least stringent, because of those two considerations. Ella, the reason for the order is bito. We're going to see in the beginning of the daf tomorrow that relations with between a father and daughter are not actually explicitly mentioned in the Torah. Obviously, it's not allowed, but it's not explicitly mentioned, and the rabbis have to do a comparison in order to find that it's prohibited. And so because we only know from a derasha, it's actually more beloved, which is really paradoxical. We started off saying it should be the most stringent, the one that's really there. And if it does the most stringent, it should be the one that's explicit. But then we flip it around and say explicit things we know, but when the rabbis learn it, that makes it beloved, because we had to put in our own human effort to figure out the law. And so that's actually, we're starting with the one that it is still the oraita, but it's not explicit. It's derived by derasha, and that's the one that's most beloved. And so we're going to start with that. And so that's how we explain the reason why the Mishnah lists the daughter first. And we'll begin tomorrow with what that derasha is, and we'll go from there. Congratulations on completing the first daf of Yevamot, and I hope we have a good sense of the type of concepts that we're going to be seeing. And as we get used to the concepts, it will hopefully flow smoothly. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.